Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Kroll, and thank you for having me here at the Strange Loop Conference. Thanks to the folks that invited me and for y'all that are coming out. AV folks in the back getting me mic'd up and everything. This is Some Things May Never Get Fixed. And if you saw this title and you selected this on your schedule and you're wondering, what the heck is this about? Well, I was wondering about that too. We had to pick these titles out a while back. So I picked this out kind of open-ended to be able to figure out what I was going to do afterward. And as time went on, I figured out that this thing will probably be more about moving on from another stint in big tech. And if you're not familiar with me, I'm one of these people that lives in Silicon Valley. I'm part of the problem out there, basically. Yeah, sysadmin, programmer, writer, professional cynic, according to somebody in one of my performance reviews back a long time ago. Hi, Greg. And yeah. Today we're talking warning tales about big companies and also some small ones that may happen to get it wrong, really wrong. There will be a couple of war stories because it wouldn't be a talk from me without war stories. And just a warning that good places change. And today's sure thing might be tomorrow's disaster. So okay, this comes up all the time anytime I tell a story. People ask me like, hey, didn't you work at such and such? Or isn't this story about this place? You must have worked at this place. You must have worked at Microsoft. You must have worked at Verizon, something like that. People ask me this all the time because it sounds like I'm describing something that's exactly what happened at their company. And you know what? Most of the time, I did not actually work there. It's just funny that the same thing still happened. So if you know me and these stories sound familiar, maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the story is about that, but also the answer is no, because chances are there's probably 10 different stories from that same company that might apply. Like how many times did somebody set all the root passwords to the same thing? Right, So, okay, let's talk a little positive here. We're talking about broken things, but in all likelihood, nobody is hired to break stuff, to just outright come in and make life miserable. Now, I'm not talking about red teams and tiger teams. These, if you're not familiar, these are the folks that, in the case of like a red team, they come in and try to break security on a company's systems. They try to worm or weasel their way in to figure out like, ooh, can we figure out how to compromise somebody by making them view as somebody else, and then we have to log out 50 million people. Don't look at Hacker News. These people are actually trying to make things better. I'm not talking about them. Red teams are good. Red teams are your friend. So are tiger teams. They try to like break into things. No. What I'm talking about is nobody gets hired to purposely make this a crappy place to work, hopefully. Keep that in mind as you follow along with me here, because again, I mean it, nobody is hired to break stuff. Really, unless you're working with psychopaths, that should never happen. And just to sort of repeat things, I mean, nobody is hired to break stuff, except maybe this guy. Anybody remember this? Yeah, airplane? All right, cool. Yeah, now, if nobody's hired to break stuff, somebody might be hired to be the fixer. There might be multiple somebodies, for example. These are the kind of people who are given wide access to all kinds of things inside your company. And they can snoop around, they can get into the source code, they can run RPCs and queries and kind of poke at things and just kind of try and shake it up and say, hey, what happens if we do this? Oh, what happens if we do this? It's like, oh, that could be bad. Somebody could trip on that, right? But imagine the electronic version of that. That can happen. Now, when this is done correctly, they find things and they get them fixed, and everybody learns and benefits. Hopefully, you have a culture that shares this kind of knowledge. But unfortunately, as I've kind of seen, there can be a dark side to this as well. Yeah, there are things which are conclusively broken in this world. And when I say broken, conclusively broken, I mean like I could describe it, and anybody in this room, computer person or not, would probably look at it and go, yeah, I think that's also broken. You wouldn't have any ambiguity as to whether like this thing should be working. Should all the machines have the same password? Should the clocks be at the same time? Dumb things like that, right? So you would come up with one of these things, let's say if you're the fixer, and you report it and you say, hey, look, this thing is wrong. Nobody would challenge that. They would agree, yeah, that thing is wrong. And yet, nothing happens. Hours might go by, days might go by, weeks, months even. You could try escalating You could try finding a full bird, a VP, full bird colonel, right? And basically ask them, like, oh, dude, what's up with this? Why are we doing this? Nothing. You post to a little internal 101 group that's just you and the full bird, and the view count goes up to 1, or actually 2 because it's you and them that's read it. No like, no comment. I don't know, it still remains broken. It's almost as if somebody wanted it to stay that way, right? But that doesn't make sense. Nobody would do that on purpose. Also, when we talk about things that broke, hopefully we are in fact talking about the things that broke, like what happened, maybe how it happened in terms of technological stuff, and not throwing people under the bus. If your company has a culture of having like an annual review, or not annual review, sorry, a weekly review, where you sit down and you talk about like what broke in the last week, what can we learn from it, what can we do differently, then you might call this a SEV review process, you might call this incident management review, you might call this a postmortem. Hopefully you leave out the who did something. Because yeah, while it may have been that, that intern on their last day of work that pushed that particular, flag flip that turned on the feature that ended up, causing the stock to go down $20 or whatever, like those things you don't really want to get into in a public forum because it's not appropriate. It doesn't actually gain anything, and it only just hurts that person. So you try to stay away from that. So, companies operate this way, and those companies tend to be healthy. But I worry about one thing when you have this kind of culture, and don't ask me why I think this. I wonder, does this provide a bunch of convenient shadows where people can just kind of hide, right? Can they just kind of cower behind it and just be like, no, you can't see me. I'm just doing bad things back here. Can they get away with shirking their duties for a very long time? And then when they do, what happens? What does that do to reliability? So of course, yeah, I have stories of being a fixer who was welcomed with open arms. It was like, oh, hey, come here and work for us, and we'll fix things. And everybody will learn from it. Things will get better, people will learn from each other, and nobody will purposely slack off or deliberately make things worse or avoid fixing things. And so for our fellow employees, you grow and you learn. However, of course, there's always a dark side here. There's the bad times. I also have stories of when the same behavior, trying to fix things, doing the same thing you've been doing all along for years, yielded nothing but the organizational equivalent of an immune system response, right? This is when everything gets inflamed, and no matter what you do, it just makes it worse, right? If you've ever gotten too many bug bites and you've just all over the place, at a certain point, there's nothing you can do because it will just make you break out more. Companies work the same way. It's kind of amazing. They circle the wagons, they defend their pointless state of affairs for whatever reason. And sometimes this is just no big deal. This is just one person who's just like, this is what we're doing, and go away. Other times, however, it can turn into something truly toxic that has to be seen to be believed. And then this is where you get into the realm of you're an unappreciated fixer. You're a troublemaker. This is where people start saying horrible things about you. And they use the anonymous feedback mechanism of the biannual performance review of your company to snipe at you. Okay, so why am I bringing everybody down with this stuff? This is supposed to be, happy, friendly, and we're supposed to laugh a little bit here, right? The guy from Airplane was hopefully, to bring everybody's spirits up. Well, what can you do? Well, if you're stuck in one of those visa situations that we do in this country to people, and you have to have the job, just lay low and don't hurt anybody. And just, I understand we do awful things to people because it's basically organized slavery. It's legalized slavery on the part of the federal government. I get that. If you have a house, if you have a mortgage, if you have kids here, if you have a reason and you cannot leave your job, please don't rock the boat for, just because you're one of the Rebel Alliance and you're like, I read Rachel by the Bay and she says I should rise up. It's like, no, don't do that, right? But if you happen to be privileged and you can legally work here, or you're permanent resident or whatever, or your parents happened to hook up on these shores years ago, assuming you're here in the US, and you can just walk out the door and into another job, maybe that's what you should do. But now, before you do that, you can turn around and take that feedback, that nasty, horrible, toxic feedback that you got, and share it with everyone else as noisily as possible so they can see what can happen to someone else who is in the same company who only meant well, and yet, now they're on the outside. Now, how does this happen inside a company? I talk about repeat offenders a little bit here. I have this hypothesis. It's not even a theory. It's just an idea where I think that there are these vultures that kind of swoop around, kind of circle around, and they're looking for companies where they get to really tasty places, and they're like, ooh, wow, look down there. Look at all the interesting, look, they're worth $50 billion now, right? And they've got so many people. They're way past Dunbar's number. This is the 150 or so people you can keep in your head, right? There's no way they'd notice me showing up. So they swoop in and they start feasting on the remains, right? Or maybe they start feasting on the living, because that can happen too. And at some point, they join a company not because they want to make it successful, because they think it's got, it can go places, but because it already is successful and they want to get in on the action. Watch out for these people, right? Be wary. The vultures, they bring about change when this happens, when they land. And they also spread the word, because I guess vultures have a good social network. And they say that, hey, things are particularly succulent over here. And the next thing you know, all the opportunists are swept in, and they're going to consume everything they find. But of course, there's a way out. The only good part about this whole thing is that people do move on. People pick up and leave. They quit. They find better places to be, and they occasionally write cathartic volumes and share meals with their fellow survivors and get up and tell stories about it. The people who mattered tend to stick together because they know that they will find each other again at the next place, because there's always a next place. But okay, this has been depressing. Enough depressing stuff. I promised you war stories, right? So the way this works here is I'm going to tell you about some things that broke that may never have gotten fixed and may still not be fixed. I have a couple of war stories that are built in here. We'll go through them. And I also have this Slido thing, this crazy thing open on my phone. So if y'all want to put questions in there, I will be looking at them. If we have time at the end, if we don't have too many questions, I have a couple of extra bonus war stories that we can get to, and we'll just see how it works with the time we have. So first up, stuff that broke. Remember, the theme here is, if I describe this, anybody reasonable would agree this is broken and probably needs to be fixed. So this story is called corporate timekeeping. Imagine you have lots and lots and lots of computers. They're all over the place, and you need to keep them in sync in terms of time. Tick, 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 tick. And they all have to hit the same second at the same time. They can't get faster, they can't get slower, they have to just bop, 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 bop. This is a hard problem, and not just from a physics perspective, right? This is a problem of management of computers and little fiddly bits. Imagine hundreds of thousands of machines that you have to solve this for, or more. So if you've worked at a place that has timekeeping, this is old hat to you, but I assume nothing here, so I'll give you a brief primer on how this stuff works, usually. So, we have this thing that the government runs, the US government runs. It's called GPS or Navstar, depending on what you like to think of it. It is a satellite constellation that broadcasts those signals for, location. So this is when you're walking around here in St. Louis, you know where you are. But as a result of having precise location information, you also have really good time information. So companies benefit from this. They will buy these boxes, these 19-inch rack-mountable boxes, put them in a data center, and put an antenna up on the roof and snake that sucker down, plug it in there, and the box, this little appliance, this $15,000 appliance, takes the GPS time and turns it into NTP, Network Time Protocol time, which is not the same thing. They're like 17, 18 seconds off by this point. And if you happen to know why that's the difference and you've run into the problem with that, I'm sorry. That's really painful. But anyway, this box takes what's coming from 1,500 megahertz, basically, and turns it into what could be sent over an Ethernet, bling, 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 like that. Then you've got these other boxes underneath it, the ones labeled 2 in the diagram, that are probably run by like a core systems team or like an operating system team or they have all kinds of fancy names, Grid, Tetris, all these different things depending on how the parts fit together. These are real names from real companies. And they talk to the appliance box and they pull time down. But you notice there's also these arrows going like this between them. That's because they also talk to each other as peers. So notice the 2s, that's because it's stratum 2. This is more time nut talk, which basically means it's pulling time from something that's a stratum 1. Stratum 1, of course, is the time server appliance box. So they talk to the appliance, they do some peering, they figure out what time is, and then they share it downward to the clients. And in this case, I've only shown 3 of them, but there could be thousands. They're labeled 3 because they're stratum 3, because they're pulling from stratum 2. There could, in fact, be multiple strata after this, each with tens or hundreds of thousands of machines. But keep in mind, as crazy as this diagram is with all these interconnecting nodes and everything, this is just one region. And so, OK, what's a region? Well, think about your typical startup situation. You have a company, and it decides it needs some servers. And so it says, well, let's put them in, let's say if they're in Palo Alto, let's put them in Fremont, because it's right on the other side of the bay. It's close by. We can go open the cage and fix things if something breaks. So they end up with a data center on the West Coast. Yay. And then they decide, OK, well, this is bad, because California will fall into the ocean, or something like this will happen, and we need some redundancy. Also, half of our clients are on the other side of the United States, and light is slow, the planet is big. We want to be physically closer to them so that there's less latency, so they get better results. So, OK, they start up another region, except they probably call it coasts. If you work at a company that grows through this place, they have a West Coast and an East Coast. They call it this coast and that coast. OK, well, eventually somebody remembers that Europe exists. And so they end up with a data center over in Ireland or the Netherlands or some other place like that. Sweden, for example, some place where you can get the right kind of power, the right kind of air conditioning, or just cold air from the outside, pump it through. At that point, coast no longer makes sense, and so they start calling them regions. So you might have West, you might have East, and you might have Europe. And of course, Europe will eventually bite you because there'll be more than one. And then there'll be Asia, and there'll be all these other ones. But once you've done that, this diagram, which was already pretty crazy, gets even worse. Because remember, these appliances, these network appliances, these time server boxes, there will be multiple of them, one per each region, and all of these in between, the stratum 2 boxes, end up talking to the other appliances in other regions. Why? Because the local appliance might die. Now, when this happens, you're going across the internet, sometimes through a tunnel. You're going across maybe a private backbone. You're saying hi to the NSA taps as you go through the wires or the fibers. You're going under the ocean, dodging the sharks, and you're coming up on some other shore. There's a lot that can happen to your packet in between. So a time server that's really far away is not a good thing generally. But once you've done this, this little diagram, which was bad enough as it was, looks like this. Yeah, and this, imagine this is a curvature of the Earth, right? And you'll have, this is just showing 3 regions. In a big company, you might have 7, you might have 8, you might get to the point where you have to start, having another level of talk about categorizing things from the last talk. Well, to categorize these, right? Some of them are going to be, West, some of them are going to be East, some of them are going to be America, some of them are going to be Canada, some of this, some of that. This is crazy, but this is real. This happens all over the place. So remember I said some things may never get fixed? You're wondering, OK, Rachel, what breaks? I'll show you what breaks. One fine day, one of these little $15,000 19-inch 1U boxes decides to go on vacation. And it's gone. It's dead. Maybe its power supply blows up. It's usually just a little Linux box. Maybe it just gets sad. Maybe it gets rooted. Who knows? But it's gone. It is not working anymore. And nobody fixes it. That's the really crazy thing. And I don't mean nobody fixes it on a scale of like, a couple of minutes, couple of hours. I'm talking days, weeks, months go by. What happens is all those stratum 2 boxes in that region now have to reach out of region to go somewhere else. If we say that's the West Coast, the one that just kind of just checked out up there, yeah, then it's now going to the East Coast of the US. OK, so what if I told you that then, because this team was so proactive in dealing with their time servers, that they also didn't notice when another one went away? Yeah, and so now you're down to one time server, one appliance that's taking the satellite data and turning it into NTP. And we'll say that the one on the far right is Europe. So now you have Europe and the West Coast of the US all coming into the East Coast of the US, we'll say Virginia or something like that, pulling time. They're still staying synchronized, kind of, sort of, that the margin of error has gotten bigger, the uncertainty has gotten bigger. But now you're worried, right? Now you're like, oh my gosh, this is a problem. And you're a fixer, and you want to fix this, and things should be getting better. But, well, what do you do? The problem is, things had conspired already before this point to where you did not feel comfortable touching this in public. And I'll tell you why in a second here. So you're thinking in your head, okay, cool. So these people who did not own the problem and have not fixed the problem, and the full bird didn't care, maybe this will finally get them exposed, right? People will finally go, hey, look, this team isn't monitoring their stuff. And when they're being told outright that something broke, they're not doing anything about it either. But then, okay, on the one hand, that's awesome because payback, right? Yeah. But on the other hand, the site's gonna go down. And the jobs are gonna stop running, the servers are gonna freak out because they're not synchronized, and things will stop working. And will someone please think of the cat pictures? Because the cat pictures will just not work anymore. We stopped serving cat pictures, the metrics are going down. Oh my gosh. And so at that point, if you're one of these fixers that wanders around looking for things, this becomes your problem, even though you've been told, don't touch this. You know, they would come back to you and say, hey, how did you let this happen? Oh, you knew it was there all along. What do you do? What do you do? If this is you, and I really feel for you if it is, come see me afterwards and we can swap even more stories. But what do you do? These boxes, again, cost $8,000 to $15,000 sometimes. And they're not just the kind of thing you can just pop down to Fry's or like Best Buy or something and pick up. But then, one fine day, while this is going on, you notice that Amazon happened to be selling something for $300 that is the size of a pack of playing cards, maybe 2, and they can overnight it directly to your office. Clickety, 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 click, personal credit card, done. The result? That. Yeah, my friend Krusty the Clown here from The Simpsons is not there to bag on the TM1000A, that's the $300 box, because it is actually quite a nice little box for the money. He's also not there to bag on the NTP clock underneath it, that's the thing with the 336 on it. Since that is also a halfway decent device for the price, as long as A, you only speak IPv4, never want to speak IPv6, and B, never port scan your clocks with Nmap, but that's another story. Just trust me that, well, let me just put it this way. Connect to it 10 times to port 80 all at once with Netcat in the background and it will reboot. Yeah, okay, that's a fun bug report. No, Krusty is there because this is the plan which will save the world. You take this box and you take the little GPS puck and you put it up in your window, because there's a window right there, you can see it, and it happens to have enough of a view to get a lock, and that's what that yellow LED that is there in the middle, it says lock. Obviously, when I took the picture, you couldn't see it, but the third one, for all you time nuts out there, that's the PPS signal. It actually blinks at the rising edge. It's pretty sweet. And that and the clock underneath it were going boop, boop, boop at the same time. This is the plan which will save the world should that last time server die. You're going to backfeed time from your desk in secret, and you're going to plug it into the production network. These are jumper cables for the corporate clocks, basically. So, okay, you're probably wondering, like, how in the heck does this happen? How much money does this company make, right? What is a $15,000 box? It's nothing. So why didn't the fixers just go buy another real clock and put it in somewhere? Why didn't they just ship one to the data center that had the problem when it broke? Why didn't they ship one to the other data center when it broke? Why was this backup clock ordered in secret and just mysteriously showed up on somebody's desk with no information, and it was just treated as like, oh yeah, that person's a nerd and they like having it there? Why was it bought with personal money? Why was it there just in case? This is because there was a meeting earlier that year. It was called Hands Off Our Clocks. And this was after something called leap smear. Now, if you're time nuts, you probably have already heard of this, but that particular year, we had a leap second. This is where the rotation of the Earth slows down to the point where we need to add an extra second to either the last minute or the last minute of June or of December. In this case, it was June because you can see 181 here, right? Day number 181. And when this happens, the UTC, the universal time, basically has a time which is 23:59:60. I was on the west coast of the U.S., and so this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, turning into 5 where we were. Now, previous times this had happened, the extra second had broken things really badly for the company, and so the fixers rigged up this smear. And this is where you take the time, you take the extra second and you spread it out across the entire day. You make every second of the day for about 20 hours slightly longer, so that over 20 hours, you eventually pick up the extra second. Now, the whole company slowed down rather than have to deal with what happens. Because like on a Unix box, honestly, the time, you don't get that extra second. It goes, and it restarts it and does it again. It's pretty freaky. This is using Google's original technique, by the way, not their current one, where they published the algorithm and then had to figure out how to turn their algorithm into working code. This code is now in NTPD, by the way, for those of you who know these things, but at the time it wasn't. So what you see here, the top clock is UTC, although it's showing it in the Pacific Standard Time that we were, or Pacific, gosh, what is it anymore in the summertime? Pacific Daylight Time, isn't it? And then the bottom one was company name here, time. And this is what it looked like when the rest of the world had its extra second and we didn't. And 1 second later, the smear itself worked. Both clocks went to that. And so it worked perfectly. But, so you figure, OK, this has been a triumph. This is a great thing. Everything's fine. But the folks who nominally owned time at this company got mad and a little sad, both. And they said, stop touching things. These are our clocks. Why did you touch them? Well, they had been told about the smear, or the intent to smear, based on the leap second months in advance. This really cool group called the International Earth Rotation Service, greatest name ever, announces these things, usually in the first week of January, the first week of July, for what's going to happen 6 months hence. And so, in January of whatever year this was, there was this post that was like, OK, we're going to have to do this. They had been told about it. They did nothing. And again, the fixers had this, well, do you let him crash or do you let it, do you fix the thing? Well, in this case, the answer was fix the thing and just get in there and smear time out and just do it the hard way. The tech was fine. It was all politics. These politics held the whole place back. Now, if this is you, what do you do? Chances are you're not alone in this. You can make friends. You can talk to other people. And I don't just mean clicking that little button that says you're now friends with this person. I mean, you can actually make friends. And you can find other folks to talk to, right? Even here, I'm sure there's other folks, based on some of the laughter, that have gone through this. And are like, man, that wasn't just me. It's like, no, you're not alone. We're together in this. Ask them about what's going on in their world, right? Sit down and listen. Don't even talk, just listen. See what's happening. And once you've heard what's going on with them, and swap some stories. Tell them what's going on with you. And you can bond over these things. Sysadmins tend to bond over really nasty things that are like the worst gallows humor you can imagine. And by that, I don't mean like anything that's like not safe for work, and I don't mean things that like marginalize people. I mean just talking about tech and just the nasty, gunky things we have to do to keep it working. And then, of course, yes, you get snarky. Because this stuff, you have to, or otherwise you'd kind of go nuts. Because it defies logic sometimes. It's like, how can this actually be? And so finally, getting a little meta here, you take questions. You give a talk and you take questions. So at this point, we have about 12 minutes here. And I've got some questions sitting here. And I also have a couple of hidden war stories. So let me take a look and let's see what people want to know. So what is your opinion on tools like Glassdoor? How can employees best give accurate and anonymous feedback without being unfair or being punished? Internal processes. Glassdoor, to me, is, I believe, how people publish salaries, right? And they basically say, like, this is what it's like on the inside. I always worry about those things because there are companies who will try to astroturf these things, and they will say, hey, you, please go out and vote us up. Please do this, please do that. And of course, then you'll get other people who have had nothing but a bad time that will post things, and so you get selection bias going the other way. And I don't know that you can ever really get a good read on things this way. But how can employees give accurate, anonymous feedback without being punished? Yeah, I wish I knew a good answer for that, internal processes. The question here basically is like, if you have like a performance review system, it might be called PSC, it might be called perf, it might be called any of a number of things. But how do you do that? I don't know. If you're sufficiently paranoid, you'll think somebody will look at the writing style and know, oh, this person uses the word y'all. And so, hey, this might be that person. So there's never really truly anonymous. I would think that if you wanted to try to do something like that, you could try and do something really horrible and passive-aggressive and route it through somebody else. and be like, hey, can you tell that person that maybe they should look at their clock? And I hope that answered your question, but if it didn't, feel free to post an update here. Different question. How do you distinguish vultures from people who actually see a problem and want to introduce changes? Oh, that's a good question. So to me, in my hypothesis, the vulture is somebody who is like, oh, hey, look, there's darling company X, and they're just flush with money, they have all kinds of opportunities, they're hiring like crazy, they're creating traffic jams because there's so many people working there now, and I would just want to get in there and just suck that place dry. I want to get all the resources out of it. I would distinguish those from the people who are like, oh, that place looks promising, that place could go places someday, I want to get in there and make it happen. And whether this is pre-IPO, post-IPO, or whatever the equivalent is for where you're coming from, that's another story. But people who see a problem want to introduce changes, that's interesting. So would this be the kind of thing where you say, hey, this company doesn't understand social. This company is a bunch of systems people trying to build social rather than a bunch of social people trying to build systems. And one will work and one won't. And I'm a social person, so I want to get in there and help. I wouldn't call that a vulture. I would call that somebody who actually wants to help it grow. Right? Because if you see some company that's just chronically bad at whether it's customer service or social skills or technical skills or any of these other things, and you have a unique take on it and you want to help, I don't think you're a vulture. I think you're somebody who's from each according to what they can provide, and you can provide that. So, that seems legit to me. You've got my thumbs up on that. Oh, this is interesting. So, new question, thank you for this one. Stepping in to fix things for people who are refusing to do their job reminds me of the description of codependency. Yow, zing, okay, yeah. Why not let things fail so they learn? Oh my God, right here, okay? I mean, you wonder why you walk out of jobs like this, is because you start reading things and you realize, man, this could be me. I could be doing this stuff. I could be enabling these things. And the problem is you have this, like I said, it's this duality, it's this balance you have to do, where it's on the one hand, yeah, let them fail, let them hit the brick wall, maybe they'll get fired. The thing is, they usually don't. They usually don't, right? I realize I shouldn't really whisper because then they can't really transcribe it, right? No, they usually don't. But these people go on longer than you can imagine at these companies. And I wonder, what do you have on the senior management of this company that they haven't fired you yet? Right? Do you have some kind of not safe for work tape of them doing nasty things in the back alley or something like that? It's what is up with this? Remember, we got to keep it PG rated here, right? So, just use your imagination. Why are these people still here? How are they getting away with this? And why are other people just beating themselves up for this job that's more than a job for them? It's their whole life. They live and breathe it. If you cut them, they bleed that particular Pantone color blue. Did I say blue? Whatever. Oh, oops, there it is. So why not let things fail so they learn? Well, hopefully you don't have to let them fail for them to learn. I mean, personally, I like to try and teach people things, right? And just kind of sidle up to them and just open up a chat message or literally walk over to them if they're not on the other side of the world. It'd be hey, did you know you could monitor this stuff this way? In fact, that's one of the war stories I have queued up here if we have time to get to it, is there is a way to monitor those boxes that blow up, so that they don't have to be oh, that looks weird. No, they can actually get an alert, and it would be hey, you're not serving time anymore. And you can go to them on the DL, you can just talk to them, you don't get the manager involved, you don't get anybody else involved. They listen to you, they learn from it, they grow, they do things. But what if they don't do it then? What if they just be whoop, talk to the hand, I'm busy, I don't care, or I'm doing other things. And it's really, what are you doing that's more important than all the clocks? I don't know. It's not a good situation. Okay, let's see. Would I describe the most painful, soul-crushing work environment relating to politics, not tech, that I've ever suffered through and how I dealt with it? Would I describe it? Yeah, it's in a mudflat in Menlo Park. It's right off Highway 84 in Menlo Park, California. That's probably the most painful work environment. Is that what you mean by describe? It's got these big open spaces. You have desks that kind of run on forever. You don't have any offices. They've got these things called micro kitchens. You have these little badges and stuff and beep beep. No, but in terms of politics, seriously though, in terms of politics, what kind of stuff am I talking about? Okay. let me tell you some of the feedback I got. This was back in January. So I used to give a class about what to do when something broke. And I would talk to all the new people that came into the company. And so like 200 people every 2 weeks, give or take. It was, a room much smaller than this, and we'd pack them in. And I would get up here and get up there and do a song and dance, talking about like, what do you do? Open a SEV. There's no shame in opening a SEV. Do this, do that. And I cultivated this kind of persona of being the person who tells you about how things have broken, how we don't fire you because things are broken, because then we'd have to fire everybody because everybody's broken something, including me. That was the culture. That's the way things worked. But after reporting some of these things, unfortunately, things shifted and things turned around to where now the story was not positive, the story was negative. And at one point, I was actually told, do not open a security-related SEV, a site event, a severity, depending on where you've come from, without talking to this full bird or this manager. And I'm the person who's teaching people about SEVs and that there's no shame in opening one. And apparently, when pressed, the answer was, you've been disrupting the prioritization of the security teams. Really? Okay, I thought I was opening them because they were doing the work and I was helping them out. When you have people actually solving a problem and you're just there reporting it, you go, oh, I will go into the tool and go clickety, clickety, click for you so that you don't have to swap out and drop all that state in your head. But when I was told that, it was like, ooh, things have gotten chilly in here. Things are not good. The culture has shifted. And it takes a lot out of you because it's like, here I am, the SEV person, and yet I can't open a SEV without getting permission first. And yet we tell every employee that they should be able to just go and do this if they think something's wrong, and it's that bad. It's like I could never teach my class again after I was told that. That's an example of soul crushing. There's a couple others, but I won't subject you to them here because there's probably other questions. Isn't this a problem where management simply won't take the actions for the best good of the company? What is the best good of the company, right? They're still in business. They're going to make a lot of money off those cat pictures. The fact that I'm gone changes nothing, right? The thing that happened today had nothing to do with me being there or not being there, with logging out 50 million people, all that kind of stuff. They'll be just fine. They will be just fine. They do not need me. So honestly, I don't know. I think they could keep going. I think that there's a short road from awesome place to work to not awesome place to work, but there's a long road from not awesome place to work to dead. And like, you can ride this out if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. Once it goes from here to here, bail, right? If you can. Again, if you have reasons for staying here, if you're on some godforsaken visa and you are shackled to that company until they finally sponsor you, I feel for you. As a citizen here, I am really sorry that we've done this to you. We should be treating our friends better than that. It makes me almost want to cry because it's like, I have good friends who are literally 10 days away from being kicked out of the company, or the country, if the company says, get gone, get lost. All because they didn't make it to level 5 within 5 years. It's terrible, it's terrible. We do this to human beings every day. And finally, one person is asking, let's hear some of those other stories. We have 2 minutes left here. So we can rip into this real quick if you want to see one of these things. Okay, so bonus story. Open sourcing root access to the entire fleet. Hopefully this will give you a laugh. So there are these machines, they run Linux, and then the machines themselves have another machine on top because, management stuff, so you can remote into it. Those machines also run Linux. And again, this may have happened anywhere. Do not read anything into this. Now, it turned out that all the machines, the management machines, these little bitty things up on top, all had the same root password. And it was really stupid. It was easy to guess. It was like leet speak. You know what I mean? Leet speak is where you take the letter E and turn it into 3. You take the letter O and turn it into 0, that kind of stuff. Yeah. It was really stupid. It was easy to guess. It had been checked into code because there were people like logging in automatically, programmatically, instead of using proper crypto stuff and keys. And the worst part, because this was an open source project, you could Google it. You could actually, or Bing it, You could go out and you could look for what is the root password for this kind of management system, and it would be like, okay, cool, here it is, right? So you get console access to the machine, and people are like, who cares? It's console access. Well, guess what? When you have console access to a Linux box and you can reboot it, you can interrupt grub when it comes up and say, hey, you, instead of starting init, why don't you start this thing called bin bash? Why don't you start a shell for me? And the machine boots up, mounts the file system read-only, and says, here's your shell. And then you take the shell and you say, hey, that file system with / looks good. Let's make it read-write. So once you've done that, you say add user tor, and you say password tor, ha 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 ha. And then you remount the thing read-only, you reboot the box, and you bail out. And then, assuming they allow SSH with passwords, you SSH in as tor, you type in ha 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 ha, you are root. Or you can backdoor it any of a number of ways. The point is, if you have console access to a box and they don't have some kind of crypto or something locking it down, you can own the box. Over a year passed and nothing happened. And finally, I reported it. I was like, here's a sev, fire me, but this is getting fixed. They didn't fire me, but it did poison the well to where I wanted out, and I bailed. And with that, the thing is blinking at me. It is sad. So we have reached the end, but please come find me. We can talk about all kinds of other things, and thank you for having me.